Welcome to another video. Today we are talking about scales. What are they and who has them? So, I don't have every single animal that has scales up here because there are other animals that do. Butterflies and moths have them, as well as penguins, but we're not here to talk about either of those group of animals. However, we're going to focus on fish and reptiles. Now, fish have 4 different types of scales, and I'm going to mess these up, so I will put them into the video. Cycloid, centenoid, ganoid, and placoid. Fish scales do serve a purpose, and we're going to talk about those as soon as my hiccups go away, or not. So, fish scales are made of enamel and dentine, believe it or not. Sharks have placoid scales. The cycloid and the centoid scales consist of 2 main regions, a bony layer and a fibrous layer. As the animal grows, so does the scales. This growth is recorded in rings, sort of like a tree ring, and yes, you can use them to determine a fish's age. Flounders, which is a type of flatfish, are unique in that they have centoid scales on one side of the body and cycloid scales on the other. Cycloid scales are large, thin, and round or oval in shape, and these are the scales with the growth rings. Now, you're not going to find these scales on sharks or rays or their relatives. You are going to find them on other fish like this perch, and perhaps even on the stonefish, and perhaps on the coelacanth. The centoid scales are like the cycloid scales, but they have a comb-like teeth on the overlapping edge. Now, we're going to move on and talk about the other scales, the placoid scales. These are also called denticles. And these scales are found in sharks and rays. Their appearance can vary, and unlike the other scales that we've talked about, these scales do not grow with the fish. Instead, as the fish gets bigger, more new scales are added to the body. Now, these scales can vary. They can vary in size and shape. Now, it's also important, and you might be interested to know, that the scales of sharks are rough, like little teeth. And if you rub up against them, you can actually get scraped. I was reading where they even serve, in some cultures, they use the skin of sharks as sandpaper. And if you remember, we talked about, who was it? One of the animals that we covered actually gets, I think it was one of the whales, actually wears down their teeth from their diet of sharks. These scales serve as protection from predators, or they can even injure prey when it comes to the sharks. Fish scales may offer protection from parasites They also help reduce friction while swimming. Now let's switch to the reptiles, which are represented by this sea snake, the Gila monster, and this cobra. Sorry, it's a mess. Why do they have scales? Well, their scales are made out of keratin, which is different than our fish scales. Oh, I forgot something. Guys, so back to the fish really quick. So their scales, remember we talked about the ganoid scales? That is where the scales for the fish actually come from. They come from those ganoid scales. We may hit on that a little bit later. But the scales of reptiles are made out of the same material as our fingernails. And we've talked about that in other animals as well. Scales in reptiles help the animal to reduce the loss of moisture and may also offer some protection. Fish scales and reptile scales are made in different parts of the skin. In reptiles, the scales are formed in the epidermis, while in fish, scales are formed in the dermis. Now you know. And remember, never stop learning.